Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about the topic of the narrative of the left versus the right in America. And I hear this pretty often. Um, I am from and live in Germany, but actually lived in the US for a year. Also been to different states for vacation. I'm very interested in the US. I like the US. I consume a lot of news and YouTube from the USA. And what always strikes me is kind of this narrative of always politically the left versus the right. And I'm always thinking to myself, not always, but sometimes thinking, who do you even mean? Who are you talking about? Like when people talk about the left, like politically speaking, just in terms of politicians right now, sometimes they mean Bernie Sanders, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and sometimes they mean people like Joe Biden. And I'm thinking to myself, um, how does that make sense? Like, also when you talk about the right, it's kind of it doesn't really make sense to talk about the right and then mean on the one hand like Adam Kinzinger and also um, Marjorie Taylor Greene. They're just two different politicians, obviously, but also people with some same ideas, but on other issues and other mindsets, very different. The same with AOC and Joe Biden. Just to say Joe Biden is the left, or he's like from the left, or he represents the left. My question would be, what is AOC then? What is Bernie Sanders and other people who are like in this area of the Democratic Party? I mean, fair, they're both in the same party, but I think this kind of shows us the problem with American politics right now and the whole division that's going on that I think is not healthy, and I hope it gets resolved in the next years. Um, because I think a lot of Americans actually are not the right or the left, but rather in the middle. Um, like not exactly down the middle, of course, but some kind of in the middle. And you see that also with some issues and some polls where like 80% of Americans agree on things. And then you think to yourself, that's probably the middle in America. Also, I think there are a lot of very loud people on the right of the Republican Party or people who affiliate with the Republican Party and are on the far right of the party, but also people who affiliate kind of with the Democratic Party and who are on the far left of the Democratic Party. And they are very loud and they are also sometimes very visible. But the thing is that many everyday Americans might be leaning more Democrat, leaning more Republican. You also have obviously people from California in the majority are leaning more Democrat, and people from, for example, Oklahoma, you have many more Republicans, of course. And maybe in the sense, like in Oklahoma, you have a lot of conservative Republicans and more people you would describe of the right. But there are also many people, for example, in the Midwestern states, in the Rust Belt and so on, who are probably, there are probably many people who are kind of in the middle and who don't want things that people who are very loud from this right corner of the Republican Party and people who are very loud from the left corner of the Democratic Party. So I think also to kind of get over this division, this which is happening in the US, people need to understand that just putting people in just two camps doesn't really make sense and doesn't really solve the issues. Especially when you have such a big country as the USA, where I don't know how many people live there now, like 330 million people. You have very different regions, very different mindsets, of course, very different people, just in general, who think differently, of course, and that's fine, but they can't just be labeled just the right or the left, or just Republicans and Democrats. I mean, one issue I think would be very important is to break up the two-party system. And I think there are an increasing amount of people who want this, but it's like really hard to do with the electoral system to even get some people from a third party into Congress without like being elected a Democrat or being elected a Republican and then like joining the Libertarian Party when you arrived in Congress. I mean, that happens and that happened, but I mean, you've seen it with the Reform Party, who was basically crushed in the 90s, I think. And after that, you haven't really seen, I think, a third party who really has a chance of achieving anything on a national level. Of course, you have some mayors or whatever from third parties or other parties, local parties. That's cool. But I think one way to kind of look at it and kind of get in the direction of solving this division the country right now has is to see that maybe this division isn't actually that deep. I mean, of course, there are a lot of different people and a lot of different mindsets. But that's kind of normal when you have a country of 330 million people, a lot of different regions. And also, if you look at the history of the US, of course, there are many like free thinkers and also people who, yes, they just think differently and so on. And I think, I mean, that's normal when you have a country like that. But you also have to understand that many people, in my opinion, and also what you see on some polls, and also when you just kind of read some comments or just talk to people, is actually many people just want to live their life, want to live a good life with their neighbors, and are kind of in the broad middle, not only on big issues, but also in general. And I think that people should remind themselves that their neighbor isn't necessarily like the enemy just because they voted for a different candidate, or that there are only two sides, but rather there are many different opinions, and it's a range of opinion. It's not just you're either red or blue, left or right. The range is very big. And I think people should acknowledge this and just talk to each other more. And also, I hope people just know that they actually can find common ground when just talking to each other. And in the future, of course, I hope that the two-party system can be some kind of broken up on a national level. And yeah, that's just the thing I observed. Also, from a European view, it's kind of weird with us having like 6 different parties in national parliament. You wouldn't say like, okay, there's either this one or this one party, but you have 6 choices. And I think the variety of opinions in the US are also this big, but you still just have 2 parties, which kind of have to represent all these different opinions. And I think people need to be reminded of that. And I hope that people can come together and see that actually many people are in the broad middle and not on the extreme fringes.